How many ways are there to tell a story? We know there has to be at least one way, or stories would never be told. So that must be this way, right? Me telling you a story. The oral tradition. A tale older than history. Before the Epic of Gilgamesh found its way onto clay tablets, the tale was passed down from one orator to the next, perhaps perfectly preserved, or maybe with a subtle change here and there. And even today, the oral tradition exists in abundance. We still have people like Homer telling tales around the campfire, but it also appears in more common day-to-day activities. The question of, how was your day, answered in any degree of detail is a great example of this. A story is being shared from one person to the next, and if that story is interesting or entertaining enough, it may even get told again, perhaps preserved, and perhaps with some amount of exaggeration or condensing. So, that's one way. But how might we tell a story in a different fashion? And what would that even change? Hello world, my name is Atticus, and welcome to The Experiment. We already mentioned one other form of storytelling, but we're actually not quite there yet. The next medium is visual art. Words are great, but if you've ever run a game of Dragons and Dungeons, then you know it's a fair bit easier to show a picture of a person or a place than it is to describe it. Pictures are loquacious things, after all. We have found figurative art from 40,000 years ago. The Chave Pondar cave has art from 35,000 years ago, and we know the art in that cave to be animated such that the flickering of flame would create the image of a rhinoceros running or a horse looking up from grazing. All this utilizing the natural shape of the rock to add a bit of the third dimension. These stories may seem simple, as talkative as paintings can be. They're not always focused on a narrative, but they're still telling a story, even without the possible addition of a storyteller utilizing the art and animation to share myths and legends. And artists have only grown as storytellers since then. Consider the many myths that can be found on the surface of Grecian pottery, or the various Bible verses put to canvas during the Renaissance, or The Alchemist by... no, not that one. You go back to your corner. The Alchemist by Peter Bruegel the Younger. Just looking at it, you can tell something's going on, and you can even piece the narrative together without much context. The only bit of background I think you need is that alchemists attempted to transmute lead into gold. Here at the left we have our eponymous alchemist attempting just that, although with a coin that probably, hopefully, wasn't made of lead. Above him hangs a note titled Alchemist, presumably a recipe of some sort. And behind him we see a woman shaking out a purse, though nothing answers the call. Some children play in the middle ground, a man dressed as a jester tends to some flames, and yet another person reads from a book, the page also titled Alchemist. Through a window we see a family being welcomed into a church. This painting tells a tale of desperation. Either through hubris or, more likely, necessity, this family has tried to create gold from the less expensive silver they currently have. We can see the failures littered across the floor. The clothing everyone wears is worn and tattered. The alchemist, no doubt following the recipe as closely as he is able, holds what seems to be the last coin his family has. On its own, it won't save them. But if he could just get it to turn to gold, he could turn their life around. The alchemist reads from a recipe called Alchemist, Dutch for all is lost. In the background, a family is welcomed into the church, equal in number and color to the alchemist family. I imagine we're supposed to look at this and think, the jester and sage led this family astray, filling their heads with dreams of grandeur and promises of the power of alchemy, if only the family could help get the materials needed. It doesn't work. of course. And the family is forced to go to the church for aid after literally burning through every penny they owned. But how could things get that far? As beguiling and tempting the honeyed words of a jester and scholar may be, after the first few failures, I imagine you decide it's not worth the risk. The Alchemist was painted around the early 1600s, a time at which the amount of silver actually present in coins had reduced drastically, half as much after half a century. The coins themselves were worth less and less, and on top of that, the 1600s marked halfway through the 80 Years' War, though of course, at the time, they would have had no way of knowing how long the war would last. The 80 Years' War was a revolt from the Dutch peoples against Spanish rule, and who knew if the coins would be worth anything at the end of it? The moral of the painting is supposed to be clear. Folly leads to ruin. Don't melt your money, but if you do, you can always count on the church to help. But that's not how I read it. In the background, as the family goes to the church for aid, the alchemist's red shirt lacks a distinctive patch you can see on it in the foreground, and his left shoe still has its heel. I think the family went to the church first, and all they could offer were promises of a better eternity. And so the alchemist took fate into his own hands, working to change the worthless coins they had on hand into something greater. The recipe they used is called All is Lost, and the alchemist holds the last coin. We don't know what happens to the last hope. If it becomes a lump of metal worth even less than it did before, or if this time, now that they've fulfilled the very first requirement of their recipe, it works. The alchemist is able to create gold. I don't know about you, but I prefer the second telling myself. Writing has existed for ages, but widespread literacy is a more recent invention, arriving at about the same time as the printing press. And that finally brings us to books. Novels, as a storytelling medium, aren't all that different from the spoken word, but the speaker has been removed from the audience, and the tale, once written, only requires the time of the reader to be told. They also lose the music. I read a lot of Redwall back in the day, and I'm currently very slowly reading through the Kingkiller Chronicles, and both of these series have music in them. But we don't know what it sounds like. Consider the opening to the Aeneid. I know it's in Latin, but give it a shot, I won't judge. Ancient epics were written in meter, because it's easier to memorize a song than it is a series of words. The opening of the epic probably sounded more like this to the audience. Armore onque cano Troiae qui prima saboris. I'm not a great orator myself, but I think it sounds more exciting than a flat armore onque cano. And the word cano there literally means I sing. I don't mean to rag on books, I love them, and I know that if every story had to be written and told in meter or song, then we'd have far fewer stories in the world. Tales which I've enjoyed. Tales which I one day hope to tell. Next on the timeline, we have moving pictures, films, and television shows. Moving pictures are just that, pictures which move. Just the visual element, but the presence of multiple images can create the illusion of motion, and can clear up questions of the sequence of events. This painting of some scene in the Bible is read middle, left, right, for instance. Something which probably wouldn't have proved an issue to those familiar with the tale being depicted, but was a bit confusing for me when I first saw it. With a moving picture, that ambiguity is cleared up. Films and television expand on that with the addition of an audio component. The pictures can talk to us now, tell us stories, and sing us songs. And that'd be the end of this video if not for the next section, a medium which goes above and beyond even that. Video games add another element in player interaction. No longer are you hearing, reading, or watching the action hero scale a collapsing mountain or traverse the top of a moving train. Now you are the action hero. It's a neat and fun extra layer of immersion, but it can go deeper than that. Games follow rules, and most of those rules are explained up front, either in a guidebook or tutorial going over the controls and mechanics. These rules are absolute, and are what allow a game to exist in the first place, and for a player to interact with the world. So that's why when in The Last Guardian, after hours of playing the game and learning that Trico, the big catbird, can't go near those eye talismans, it's such a powerful moment when he does. Trico overcomes his fear of the talismans to protect the player from some knights. The game spends a long time building up this rule in the player's head. Talismans are bypassed by the boy, knights are bypassed by Trico. But then says the narrative transcends that rule. It's such a great moment that showcases so well how the bond between the two has grown, and while it still works in any other medium, it works best here because of how connected the audience is to the puzzle-solving process. And that covers the different mediums, though I wouldn't be surprised if I forgot something. There are so many different ways to tell a story, but even within a medium, the same story can be told a number of different ways. Consider all the film adaptations of Robin Hood or any other well-known public domain character. The same story, the same medium, but different experiences, each and every one. Even without directly comparing the same material, we can see this in how different games go about telling the audience things such as lore. In Shadow of the Colossus, we get next to nothing about the history of the world we inhabit, but we get to explore it. We see ruins, we fight ruins, and we're given plenty of space to think. What once stood here? Who lived in this valley? What would they think of what we're doing now? Shadow of the Colossus doesn't answer any of the questions it asks, and I really like that. It creates this air of mystery, and it allows everyone to experience the game a little differently as they think of their own answers while riding through that vast and empty expanse. The Dark Souls games operate pretty similarly. They place the player in an old and decrepit world, but instead of being long dead, these worlds are dying. Dark Souls tells us what once stood in this world and how great it was, through the opening cinematic and bits of lore scattered throughout item descriptions, through the friendly NPCs and the enemies you face. Dark Souls wants you to ask questions about its world and be able to find answers to those questions. It's a rewarding experience to seek and learn. Already, we have two distinct styles through which a storyteller can disseminate lore in a video game, ranging from don't to make it a fun scavenger hunt, and everything in between. But of course, there's another end to the spectrum. The Kingdom Hearts series leaves no question unanswered, and on occasion, even provides an answer before a question could be asked. We begin our Kingdom Hearts journey with the first game, introduced to a universe probably both strange and familiar. The initial title has, in my opinion, a great balance of mystery and explanation. The Ansem reports exist to provide an insight into the plot and world building, including why gummy ships work and the distinction between Heartless wearing their emblem and those that don't. It also mentions the two legends of the Keyblade wielders, one which claims they saved the world and one which claims they destroyed it. But other than a comment from King Triton and Atlantica, we don't hear much else about it. That creates a question in our and Sora's mind of if sealing the keyholes is the right move. And I like that. We the player have seen the Villain Council on multiple occasions state that they do not want Sora to be sealing those keyholes, so we can feel pretty confident that we're in the right. But it still makes us realize that we don't really know what we're doing. We've been thrust into this adventure with an ancient and powerful artifact, and we've mostly been using it as a thwacking stick. If However, you absolutely must know the truth behind the legends. You can play, or watch rather, Kingdom Hearts Union Cross, the mobile game. The mobile game that takes place in the ancient past of Kingdom Hearts where, spoilers, Keyblade wielders do a lot of world saving, and then their infighting destroys the world. Add a healthy amount of time passing, data world shenanigans, and the one guy who knows what really went down keeping quiet, and voila! We have the two legends discussed in the first Kingdom Hearts game. It's neat knowing exactly what went down, and I'm glad I have the bragging rights to beating Kingdom Hearts Union Cross, but as far as the Xehanort saga is concerned, it doesn't really feel necessary. And that might change with future titles, but the game's been discontinued. You won't be able to play it for those potential titles. I have perhaps a few more Kingdom Hearts thoughts, but I ought to save them for later. For now, I will elaborate on an odd claim I made earlier, that Kingdom Hearts will give answers before questions. In the first Kingdom Hearts on the Last Ansem Report, number 13, the new antagonist of Kingdom Hearts 2 is explained. The author of the reports theorizes on the existence of nobodies and then even name drops them in the last word of these secret lore drops. Ultimately, there are at least 3 ways to tell a story, and they're all incredible in their own way. Every medium has its own strengths and weaknesses, and so too do the different methods to tell a story within a given style. With all these options, how should I tell my story? How should you tell yours? I don't know the answer to that. I don't know if there is an answer to that. What I do know is that I have been Atticus, and I will be Atticus again. Thank you for participating.